welcome once again to Japan Expert Insights. I know we're a couple minutes behind schedule for those watching live. We just got into talking. We like each other a lot. So anyway, that's what happens sometimes. But the trains turn late, but we catch up. So while everyone's logging in, and for many people who listen to us in Spotify or, not live, a lot of times we do a little bit of chit chat in the beginning just to allow people to log in. Today, we have Megumi Nishikura in the house, and we're really excited to be talking to her. So my father, every now and then he recommends a show from me. And so this week it was like, hey, Mike, did you check out this The House of Ninjas? It's on Netflix for those who are in the States. And I said no, because I don't know. But I watch a lot of Japanese entertainment. And a lot of times if it's like ninjas or Yakuza or samurai, it's like, okay, I've seen these 1,000 times. So I wasn't sure. But, I was reminded this week because we had a friend of the show, someone who was on the show who lost their father this week. And I was like, yeah, you know what? If you're lucky enough to have a mom or dad that's still alive or both, give them a hug, give them a call, hang out with them. So I was like, okay, what the heck? I'll give it a try. My dad seems to be really excited about this show. And what's funny is that it reminded me of, it's like a family of ninjas that have a rival clan, and they kind of fight with each other. It's just as goofy and serious and crazy as you would imagine it would be. And apparently it did really well in Japan and the United States. What was interesting is that it's mostly a Japanese crew, but one of the creators of the show, I believe, was American, or at least Caucasian of some sort. And what I found was fascinating is that the show seems to thread this really fine line between Japanese and American sensibilities. It's funny because a lot of times you watch Japanese shows and you can tell they're Japanese shows, and American shows are American shows. And sometimes Japanese citizens don't like American shows because it's just too Western, and vice versa. Americans don't understand Japanese entertainment because it's slow, nothing happens, and there's plenty of things happening. But in this particular case, this particular show seemed to thread that needle where I could see the choices that were made to that what Japanese audiences would like in terms of the way the story structure and the plot was. And the music choices, definitely American. The guy picks a lot of stuff that would sound at home at a Wes Anderson film, a lot of late 60s British pop. And of course we all know that Wes Anderson studied Ozu. And so what I kept thinking about, because I knew Megumi was going to be on our show today, was how, especially over the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've seen this sort of synergy between Japan and American sensibilities, especially in entertainment, where one borrows from the other and vice versa, and we share and we learn from each other, and then we create these new and interesting things. And we never had a pure documentarian on the show before. We've had people who've done documentaries. Chiaki-san does documentaries, but she was actually, when we had her on the show a few months ago, she was getting into a narrative work. And here, Megumi, you are leading sort of the charge in a way of doing documentaries that bridge Japan and the United States. So without further ado, Megumi, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So now, how did you start doing documentaries? We always kind of ask people in the beginning, they say, why do you do what you do? Because a lot of people don't, unless you were 5 years old thinking, I got to be a documentary filmmaker. What led you to this path?
I wasn't quite 5, but I was 13 when I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I was living in Japan. I was attending an international school, and they had a video TV program or club. And so I kind of learned the basics of holding a camera and editing on tape back then, and then kind of telling a little bit of a story, and that just really intrigued me, and I decided at that age I wanted to be a director, and I had my sights on going to film school, but I don't know if I really narrowed it down to doing documentaries until probably while I was in film school. I mean, I was always interested. My father is a foreign correspondent journalist for Kyodo News. And so I think, the news was always on in my house. And so I'm sure that had a huge influence, just kind of the way, what he shared with me and how he talked about the world and his work probably influenced me as well. But I never quite wanted to get into news. I think that, for me, documentary filmmaking is telling, real stories, but in a very kind of cinematic and emotional way that I don't think news quite gets at. And so that's where I kind of set my sights on and have pursued it since.
So it was Hafu. For those who don't know, I was introduced to your work many years ago because the documentary Hafu, the mixed race experience, which came out in 2013. That was on Prime Video. They were it was one of those things that for a while they were just allowing you to stream. And I remember thinking, oh, I got to watch this. And the first thing I thought, and I still think this now, because I rewatched it, because you were very kind enough to send me a link, was when does the 8-part Netflix version of this happen? Because there was so much I wanted to know about the people who were involved. And I know you're limited. You have to tell your story within an hour and a half. But I was so eager to kind of know. So one, if not an 8-part Netflix series, is there ever going to be a part 2 where we follow up with everybody years later? Because I was very enthralled by the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, people ask us all the time. I co-directed this film with Lara Perez Takagi, and people ask us all the time, when are we going to do a sequel? Is there going to be a follow-up? I sometimes think about it, and then I go, well, what would I say that would be different? And ultimately, I think my message of wanting Japan to kind of broaden its definition of what it means to be Japanese, to include people who are Hafu, that hasn't changed. And so while I could, interview new people and people's different mixes and explore different topics within, at this point, I'm not pursuing a part 2 or a sequel. But I agree with you. There was, a lot of the times while we were making the film, people would come up to us because we were very kind of open about our production process, and we documented our journey while we were making it. And we held a lot of kind of, preview screenings and fundraisers to help, get this film made. People would come up and say, well, why don't you talk about this topic? Or do you have somebody who's Brazilian Japanese? Or everybody had a different combination. I was like, oh, yes, I know. We'd love to include all these stories. And so, but, we only got 90 minutes. So we want to do, the 5 people whose stories we tell, we want to do their stories to the best of our ability. And even that, I think 90 minutes wasn't quite enough. And so I do feel like there could be a Netflix series. So if anybody from Netflix is listening in,
I did invite a lot of people from Netflix and Hulu, so I never know who's really listening. Right. I'm hoping people are listening, but hey, if you're listening, let's work on this. This would be fantastic. So Maya, who's in the house, we actually have a trailer for Hafu. And so, Maya, how you doing? I know I didn't introduce you because you were busy working behind the scenes. And that's the problem when you have 3 people and we do this like a presidential debate where you're always on screen, that you're like, okay, we got to get it moving. But we have a trailer for Hafu.
Yes, let's go with it.
We'll show that to everybody and we'll be right back.
He was started to be called names. You are not Japanese, you are Egojin.
毎日喧嘩を歌えてました。
Are we seeing it?
It's no, but we can hear.
We can hear it. Okay.
We can hear it. Yes.
どこにいても目立つし、みんな不自然に見るから、もっと自然に扱ってくれよって。すぐそこの隣のやつに話しかけてるみたいな、俺にも話しかけてくれよと思うわけ。
We'll come back to it.
自分が日本人って信じきってたから、
Yeah.
居場所がなくなった感じ。
When you're younger, you don't want to be different. You want to be like everybody else.
日本自体にあまり繋がってる気がしてなかった。
I feel like Japan is changing. Every day you see all these little half Japanese children running around.
自分と同じような背景の人が実はいっぱいいるんだってことに気づいて出会いたいなと思った。
He realized that he didn't have to try to become someone that everybody else expects him to be.
どこにいても偏見や差別もあるし、人間としてちゃんと人を見れる人間とつながっていけばいいんだと思った。
違うことを嫌うのではなくて、受け入れて学んでいくことによって日本の未来がすごい明るくなるんじゃないかなと思います。
We always get it working in the end.
Yay.
That's what's great about our show. But you can always check out the trailer. We highly encourage everybody. Is the Hafu film website still up and running? I know there was like a...
Yeah, it should be up and running. I mean, I didn't check it today, so hopefully.
Okay, yeah. We'll link to everything, obviously, so people can find out where all this is. So that was your first like full-length feature, according to your Internet Movie Database anyway.
Yes.
So obviously you are, as you say, mixed Japanese. So obviously that was part of the reason why you wanted to do this documentary, but please elaborate a little bit more as to like what, obviously that was important because that was your first one. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, I was born and raised in Japan. My father's Japanese, my mom is Irish American. I ended up, I think I didn't have any really terrible experiences, but I was acutely aware from a young age that I was different from everybody else in Japan. And, for example, I, would often be stared at when I would be on the, subway, commuting to school, or, when I was in class, when I attended Japanese public school, the teacher would sometimes ask me to say whatever we were talking about and say, how do you say that in English? And so there was always kind of this like attention on me that I was aware that I was different. And then I, switched from going to Japanese public school and, transferred over to international school. And that was really wonderful in many ways because I was in a very diverse environment. There were many other half Japanese people like myself. It allowed me to study video production and lead me on this path that I am today. But international schools, I think, they're designed largely for actually the expat community who comes from abroad and, wants their kid to have, only living in Japan for a couple of years and then to kind of basically plug back in their home country and continue their education. And so the schools I attended really encouraged you to, ultimately pursue college and university outside of Japan. And so that's what I did. And I went to film school in New York. And I think at that time, when I was 14 and deciding to become a filmmaker, I really was like, oh, okay, I kind of don't fit in Japan, and I'm gonna, and where do you go for film school? You go to New York, you go to LA, you go to the best places to learn filmmaking. And I kind of didn't really see a future for myself in Japan. And so I left Japan and went off to film school, and honestly didn't think I would come back to Japan, but kind of life has its mysterious ways. And when I was kind of in my mid-20s, I did come back. And that was, I think the first time where, I was really living, as an adult, living out in the world, working, kind of being outside of the international school bubble, and having to interact with everyday Japanese people all the time. I was working as a documentary producer already, and so I would kind of email and make phone calls in Japanese to plan my documentaries. And then whenever I would meet people in person and hand over my meishi, my business card, I would always kind of be, the reaction was always very surprised. They were always surprised to see me meet somebody whose name is Nishikura Megumi, but then see my face. And I would get questions like, "Oh, are you married to a Japanese person?" So there was always, I think as an adult, I really had to face, on a nearly daily basis of not quite fitting into Japan. And I think that feeling and that the restlessness that I felt around it really made me want to tell the half Japanese experience. And so I worked with Lara Perez Takagi, and we spent 3 years making the film.
Now, my first question always is with this, because it's funny because I always had all these ideas of questions I'd ask you if we ever got you on the show, and we got you on the show, so I can ask you these questions. It's so fantastic. I kind of wonder, because Japan historically obviously had a period of isolation for a couple centuries. So I feel as if sometimes the outsider going into Japan, there's a little bit of maybe top of mind awareness, or it gets played up a little bit, because part of me feels if you're Japanese and you go to school in Sweden, you might have the same experience as you would being half Japanese being in Japan. But I don't know. So did you feel that because of the structure, the societal structures of Japan, and because of Japan's history, that being a half Japanese person or being an outsider is in fact more drawn out or more noticeable than, let's say, somebody who is like Asian who goes to Scandinavia?
I mean, yeah, I think it really depends on your individual circumstance. I think, speaking for myself, I am half Irish American. I have only lived in kind of major metropolises in the United States, so New York, Los Angeles, Hawaii, Honolulu. So I feel that in the United States, because people have such diverse backgrounds, it's not made a big deal of, oh, you're part Japanese or you grew up in Japan. Oh, okay, that's nice. And then they move on. But in Japan, I often felt, much more singled out and kind of made aware that, oh, you have a very different experience. And it often, wasn't, you had in some ways more attention paid to you. And as an introvert, I'd be like, no, I want to hide. Don't ask me so many questions. But yeah, so I do feel that for me, certainly the experience is definitely heightened in Japan as being somebody who's mixed race.
And in America, I mean, we're a settler nation, It's like the comedian Colin Quinn said, give us, you're hungry, you're tired, you're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, everyone just come on in. It explains a lot about our country. But so we don't see that. Yeah, if anything, it's kind of expected that you are a mix of something. And I grew up as a mix of Irish, Scottish, German, French, Filipino, Spanish, Norwegian, and I think Seminole Indian. So I was a mutt. I don't know, but I look at me, I know I just put European white, because that's just what I end up looking like. But yeah, especially in America, depending on what part of America you're in, being of a more ethnic race, obviously is, if you're in the big cities or in suburban areas, it's not too much a big deal. If you're in, out in the middle of the boonies, sometimes people get a little wary, but I think it's definitely gotten better. Well, it was getting better for the last 20, 30 years, and now we seem to kind of going in a different direction. Is it gotten better in Japan since the documentary?
I would say there are some certain markers that show that things have progressed. I think shortly after our film came out, and I think 2015, there was the first mixed race Miss Universe Japan, Ariana Miyamoto. So she went on to be number 6. So that was a huge success. And then I think even more, probably the world's most famous Hafu is Osaka Naomi, the tennis player. And so I think what I've seen is that, like Hafus are to some degree kind of like adored and pedestalized in Japanese society. If you look at, TV, you see the Hafu Talento, you see the like women's magazines with all the Hafu models on it. But, that's a kind of very narrow view of who Hafus are and what the Hafu experience is like. And it tends to be, mixed white, model gorgeous, and then like, kind of bicultural, like completely, versed in both languages and cultures. And that's not really the case. I often like to say, like, the Hafu experience is a huge spectrum of people who are more Japanese to less Japanese. And there's all different factors of, where you were raised, which parent was Japanese, which language you spoke in your home, which educational system you went through. Those all factor into it. And I think what we've seen with Miyamoto, Ariana, and Osaka Naomi is that like the shift in of like kind of getting out of just white mixed Hafus as being like kind of the predominant image is to like broaden that kind of color shift, that there are many other people who are mixed and are Hafu too, and are able to represent Japan on a world stage, which I think is really incredible.
Yeah, I think that nowadays, even in sports, because I agree with you that up until maybe 10 or 7 or 8 years ago, at least up until the pandemic started, so the view and the understanding of what a Hafu can do in Japan was really limited. But still, it's since the pandemic, there has been a younger generation of sportsmen and sportswomen, and they have been presenting Japan. So many of them are nowadays, they come from international marriages. Culturally, they're very Japanese too, even though their looks, they are obviously different from 100% Japanese native, but still the Japanese nation is embracing those sportsmen, right? Sports people, which I think is a huge step forward to normalizing being a child of an international marriage here in Japan. Because I can also say my daughter she comes from an international marriage, right? And her, in the beginning, of course, when she started going to school, I was kind of apprehensive. I tried not to go to the school too often because I was afraid that maybe there would be something there, special attitude. But then one day when I went to the sports festival, and I was there with my husband, of course, but my daughter was up there in their room with her girlfriends on the second floor, and I heard somebody shouting, "Mommy!" And I didn't understand it was her first, right? And then I looked up and saw her surrounded, at the window, surrounded by her girlfriends, and she was telling everybody, just pointing at me, and then said, "That's my mother," and I am what I am. So, which told me that she was actually not afraid of saying to everybody that she came from an international marriage. And at that point of time, I felt an incredible gratitude to the teachers in the school, because I realized that she was not afraid of saying that, because those teachers never made it an issue that she came from an international marriage, right? So, and it was something very normal, obviously, at that point of time for her. And there are also nowadays a couple of other children in the same school who come from international marriages, but they are fine. And I feel that, once again, I repeat myself, but the gratitude to the teachers, because they have normalized that for everybody in that school. And I think that, as you mentioned in the beginning, Japan is making a progress. Yes, So, and of course, there are more children nowadays who come from mixed marriages. Probably that's another reason. But yeah, I think that Japan is changing for the better. Maybe not at the pace we want it to, but still, change is here.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing.
Oh,
So,
no, it's, yeah.
no, it's so like I said. I mean, once again, if you ever do Hafu Part 2, we have people. Maya,
Yeah, yeah.
let's just do this.
I mean, I would say that like now on social media, you really see like I don't know. I watch clips all the time of like on the street interviews with Hafu people,
Yes.
and so in some ways, I feel like people would rather actually watch those clips than watch a full movie these days.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Like we come from a more traditional, let's just have production values sort of mindset into putting things out, but
Yeah.
it's a strange world.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a shift in how people are consuming, but that's another discussion for another day.
We'll get
Yeah,
Jan back on the
yes,
show. We'll
it
talk
is.
about how social media is ruining everything. So no, yes, yeah, it is. So 2013, you do Hafu, and then your next documentary, you go. I guess like maybe it's just the tradition. Like as all artists, we go a little darker for the second one. But Fall 7 Times Get a Bait, the Japanese war brides experience, which is so for many of those who haven't seen this, it's basically it's shorter. It's only about half an hour long, but it's about a lot of the American GIs who brought home Japanese wives, and it's about those experiences. Which it's funny. My grandfather, he met my grandmother in Cebu, the Philippines. So she wasn't Japanese; she was Filipino. So immediately, of course, when I heard about this, I wanted to talk to you about that as well. So what led you to go from Hafu to this documentary?
I mean, I think I am definitely interested in kind of all the different ways that Hafus have come to be. And so there's so many different routes of how our parents met. Obviously, many people came to Japan, and then, Japanese people also left and moved abroad. And so I'm just fascinated by all those different routes that historically has happened. And obviously, World War II was huge, a huge moment between certainly Japan and the US, but a big moment for the world. And so there are many, as a result of it, there's a lot of mixing that happened. And so, through making Hafu, I met a journalist in Japan named Lucy Kraft, and she had wanted to tell her mother's story. She was a child of a war bride, grew up in the United States, and so she wanted to tell her mother's story, and was working with two other women, Catherine Tolbert and Karen Kosmowski, who were all children of war brides. And so I worked with them to help produce, a half an hour documentary that was on the BBC about their mother's story. So maybe we can play that trailer.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Emperor is telling us we lost the war. We lost everything. It was a nightmare.
The original order was that they were not to fraternize with the local people. But this quickly became unworkable, and lots of romances developed.
Americans did look more attractive. They are well-fed, happy-go-lucky. They had tremendous appeal to young girls.
I wasn't in love with him. I don't even know him. I just took a chance. I want to get out.
They had to assimilate, so they were not encouraged to speak Japanese at home.
Well, I think the most difficult thing for the girls to learn here has been walking on high heels.
And my in-law, they don't want to call me Hiroko. They call me Susie.
When we see pictures of you with your mother-in-law and your sister-in-law, everyone seems to be happy and having a good time.
You're supposed to look that way in the picture.
I never really saw her as a mother because compared to the other mothers that I knew, she didn't act at all like them. I think the biggest challenge that she faced was that she was raising American kids.
How were you able to go over those hurdles? Is it just because you were tough and stubborn?
And also very proud.
I'm not Japanese. I'm completely American.
And yet every morning you make miso soup.
Well, the food is a different story.
The women who came over had a lot of grit and fortitude. I don't think I would have had the courage moving with a man that I didn't know, whose language I didn't speak, to a country that I really wasn't aware of, without any backup. What these women represent is what is good about people, that they can forgive and they can go ahead and just start lives with people who used to be their former enemy.
You know, I see that and I think about my grandma. Even though she wasn't Japanese, she was Filipino, but that was part of their experience and of many people's experience. And so you did this for the BBC. Now, how did that go over? What was the response to this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, we made this film independently. I worked at a production company in New York City, and what I affectionately call the War Bride Daughters, Lucy, Karen, and Catherine, were the directors of this film. And we, spent several months. I think the production itself was like 2 weeks long, and then, we took time to do the edit. But this film was completely independently made. And then we were able to kind of get bought by the BBC. BBC, they broadcast it worldwide on BBC World News, which was incredible. I didn't have my own subscription to BBC World News, so I didn't get to see it live, broadcast. But it was seen by their full worldwide audience. So millions of people. And we received all these, they kind of sent us afterwards, a document with all the comments and emails or things that people wrote after watching the program. And it was just so wonderful to see that, I think, ultimately, even though, yes, as you kind of indicated, it's a story about immigrants and people who are building lives in their new home and having mixed marriages, and then also having their children, mixed race children, and kind of the challenges of adjusting to their new life and raising their mixed race children. And so I think a lot of people could see themselves in that story as well, even though they may not have been Japanese at all, especially people in America, and other different minority groups could also identify with this journey that these three women took.
So when you decided to do these stories, obviously Hafu and falls 7 times get up 8, which, by the way, for those who don't know, it's a Japanese, that's an old Japanese, what would you call it? Not a term, but it's a philosophy or just a saying. What did you find you were able to take away? What were the surprises when you worked on these things? And was there any reception to Japanese audiences? Did they find them interesting as well? Or was it mostly just people on the other side of the pond?
That's a great question. I think, as far as Fall 7 Times Get Up 8, I think the primary audience was focused on Americans for that film. And I know that, one of the things that, and, you'll see in my my next film, is that like the largest group of Japanese immigrants to the United States was at like the turn of the century in the top 1900s, and that was the population that ended up actually being incarcerated during World War II. And so they, in telling kind of the Japanese American story, that story is often told. But the War Brides are certainly a lesser known story of this kind of immigrant, time period and, movement to the United States. And so I think that was one of the goals of the film, is to kind of highlight these women's stories in a way that hadn't been done at all, really. And so, yeah, I would say our primary goal was to show it in the United States, but we did have some screenings in Japan. And I think, there was always kind of a lot of interest from Japanese women in international marriages. I think they could identify whether they moved abroad or even if they just stayed in Japan, that they, some of the same challenges that these women went through, that they could also identify with. Yeah.
Why do you think it's important for people? I would say, now, personally, I think it's important now more than ever for people to understand these stories, as we're seeing populism on the rise, and we're seeing a lot of these sort of just stuff that we thought was just long buried, just resurfacing itself again. But on brighter notes, we have people like you who are doing these type of documentaries. What do you feel when you are tackling these? And then we'll get into your later works here in a moment, because I know in your career you sort of you kind of go into these different directions, and then it looks like you're coming back this way. Why do you think it was important for people to understand the sort of the Japanese American dynamic, besides the fact that you're obviously Japanese and you're an American? Was there other facets to this that you thought were interesting, other interesting elements to this dynamic?
I mean, certainly, yes. It's because I'm half Japanese and half American, and I see all these stories that I'm telling are a part of me and part of the fabric of my identity. And so I want to explore all aspects of that, and not just be, I think it's very, or at least in my experience, it's one thing I like to say is that, like, Japan kind of, the moment you step one foot outside of Japan, you're kind of like quickly like kicked out. Like, they're like, oh, you've tasted the food of a foreign land, you don't belong anymore. And so, like, there seems to be this divide that, like, oh yes, if you immigrate abroad, you're no longer Japanese. And then even within the, like, certainly Japanese American community, there's a divide between, oh, we were the Japanese Americans that went through the incarceration camps, and now we are the Japanese Americans that were the war brides. And so there seems to be these different divides, and there is some, legitimacy. People had different histories and different experiences, but I want to, I want to tell all of these stories. And because they're all part of Japan and its diaspora and all the different ways that the world is really ultimately mixing and changing. And so I think that's really why I'm doing it. Yeah.
I think it's a universal story, more universal than we realize. I had a lot of buddies, because I grew up in the Irish neighborhoods here in Chicago, and I had one buddy of mine who, last name with Mick. Like, he went to Ireland because he was so excited, because I'm going to be with my people, my Irish, and then they all said the same thing. He was in his younger 20s, and he reminded me a little bit of the one girl who was in your documentary, who was Japanese, and she'd go in and she's like, God, I just don't feel like I fit in. And he kind of had a similar experience where he was like, they just kept telling him, you're American, you are not Irish at all.
Right.
You looked Irish or whatever, but you were, even if you're 100% Irish, you were just not Irish. You went to America. So I think it's something that is common, not just to Japan, but to pretty much most places. And America is kind of its own weird thing too. You go to America, we stick out, and yet I go to Japan and I try not to stick out. I really do. I can't help it. I'm really trying, guys. I'm sorry.
No, Michael, that's fine. But I have a question to you, Megumi. So, do you think that your documentaries are accepted in different ways in the United States and in Japan? That people view them with different eyes and with different feelings, and let's say they have different takeaways, even.
Yeah, I assume so. One thing that just came to mind is that when we were making the Hafu film, and still in the editing process, and we did a few test screenings, and we did test screening for like a completely Japanese audience, and then we did a test screening with like a mixed audience of international and Hafu people, and kind of it was very interesting to see how the audience was in the room, and like where the Japanese were much more serious, and like they didn't kind of laugh at different moments as much, and like their questions were very I guess they didn't have that many questions, but whereas like the more mixed group had laugh louder and were more emotive, so there's definitely I think people are taking away from things from my films in different ways, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So you worked on a few things afterwards. So you do these, and then you kind of veer away a little bit from doing sort of these Japanese-centric documentaries. What are you working on? We could talk about those a little bit too. Like, I guess I could ask you is, starting with those documentaries, what I would like to say, and then working up the way to the stuff that was different. I know you worked on one with the wrestlers, and you did then the one religious cult where the leaders went down, which of course, obviously knowing from what I know about Japanese history, they have an interesting relationship with religious cults. So what is the hardest thing about doing documentaries, and has that changed in the last 10 years?
I mean, I think documentaries, so I have been told, I think, when you make your first feature film, when I made Hafu more than 10 years ago, you're kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and you like think that all these doors are going to kind of open up for you, and definitely some doors did open, but the reality is, and I've had this experience in trying to get my films off the ground, is that I often am told by big broadcasters and streamers and that kind of thing that my films are not commercial, and so they so I think that's always been a big challenge that I've have had to deal with. And so the challenge in documentaries is that like I can't really I can't sustain a career off of the films that I want to tell. And maybe that's a very sad.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of BS. I wouldn't take that. Like, Jiro Dreams of Sushi isn't that commercial of a documentary either, right? Like, let's be honest. Like, I mean, I know what documentaries. Yeah, if you want to do something that's scandalous, yeah, I'm sure you can. That's what they're looking for. They're just being lazy. They just don't want to do it, because I found Hafu to be very, very insightful and entertaining.
So I have to work, basically, I mean, in essence, I have to work as a producer on other types of documentaries, more commercial projects to kind of make ends meet. And then when I have some downtime and, have saved a little money from my other films, then I'm able to kind of put it towards my next project. So that's how I have been doing things. But it's kind of all a juggle to try to continue to tell these stories.
It's the artist problem, right? I mean, I was talking to my dad the other day. He was talking about Willie Nelson and how, like, he says, yeah, and the producers, you just come in and ruin everything. It's, you have people who, which is why he started his own label, the way a lot of artists do. It's trying to balance the commercial aspects of your art and the, integrity, the artistic integrity. And the irony is that a lot of times the stuff that we remember isn't the stuff that was done commercially. It was the stuff that was done with artistic integrity that had a lot of commercial value to it. It's one of the nice things that, people always tell us that AI is coming for us. AI is really bad at predictive analysis, predictive analytics, excuse me, words. It can't predict something that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about being in the arts or being in a documentary producer, is that we are allowed to set the zeitgeist and move it into a different direction, whether that be aesthetically or through our content, whatever, we can determine that in the end. And it's a shame, but I think they'll be having this discussion 1,000 years from now.
Again, yes.
It's always like, why?
Yeah, for me, I think this is where, like, making Hafu and now my latest project, I'm really trying to kind of build community around my filmmaking. So like with Hafu, we did lots of different events. People hosted parties for us in their homes and just invited their friends, and we would do screenings, like preview screenings, and have discussions, because I think really, ultimately the stories that I want to tell are about kind of a very specific type of population, and the people who are basically in between Japan and the rest of the world, the people who live in between. And so for me, I think it's just so important, obviously I want people to support my work, but I know there are other filmmakers too who are doing this type of work. And I think it's really important that, the people who want to see these films come out and support these films, and help them get made, because that's really the only way. Because otherwise, commercials, the Netflix will just say like, oh, thank you, but no thank you, not enough people, not enough demographics or analytics to support green lighting your project. So
part of me wonders if there would be some business interest in this, because that's one of the things I've been like kind of noodling on, especially too because I think Japan has done a wonderful job with their sort of a cool Japan, like, hey, the soft power is one of the 8 wonders of the world. Let's just be honest. Like, what Japan was able to do to make people like Japan. I kind of feel though now we're kind of getting at this point in our culture where, we have our otaku geeks, I see them, they have pink hair, they go crazy, they love their anime, but we're starting to realize that, that's not really Japan. And it's starting to become a little bit of an issue, right? Because we see these people zooming around in their Mario Karts in Tokyo, and I'm just like, ugh, you're ruining what's wonderful about this country. So, but I get it. I mean, I have the same problem. I'm from Chicago. We get associated with gangsters still. It's been 100 years. Just stop. All right. That's not the real Chicago. That's not the real Japan. And I wonder if businesses who are now realizing, especially in Japan, that they've been doing it, being more international, that getting the messaging across to understand the real Japan wouldn't have some sort of, I don't know, there seems to be, there would be some sort of financial initiative as well, just to be able to educate people on that second, third, fourth, fifth layer of Japan and Japanese culture. I don't know, just a thought. If anyone's listening, please get Megumi some money to make her documentaries, because she's leading the charge. Speaking of which, what are you working on now?
Yeah, so I, it's kind of, in some ways, I think this is my sequel to the Hafu film. In the Hafu film, we've featured 5 people. We talked about all these different issues, whether it's like, language, like educational system, what your family life is like, your upbringing. And we also touched very briefly on the topic of citizenship. In the film, we followed Ed Sumoto, who is a Venezuelan mix. And at the time when he was born, Japanese women couldn't give their children a Japanese citizenship. And so he grew up in Japan as a Venezuelan citizen. And so in the film, we show him going through the process of naturalizing to become Japanese. And he talks about a lot of the identity issues of what it means, like, do you feel Japanese without a Japanese passport? If he has to give up his Venezuelan passport to become Japanese, is he still Venezuelan? So we explored that. But in that 87-minute film, that's probably really a 3 to 4 minute scene, and that's a topic that I feel a lot of people, for me, is certainly kind of the biggest issue that I wanted to further explore. And so a couple years ago, I decided that I was ready to make a new film, and I started speaking to, I just spent like almost a year just talking to people, doing research about kind of many of the different thoughts and feelings and challenges that they have around the issue of dual citizenship in Japan. And so after speaking to a number of people, there was several things that I learned, is that the nationality law is very complicated, and there's like 20 plus articles of like all the different specific ways the law applies. And one of the things that I learned early on is that the law of the Japanese nationality law that applies to people like myself who are born with dual nationality is different than how the law applies to somebody who is Japanese but then acquires another nationality later in their life. And that's Article 11.1. And what I learned is that Article 11.1 basically says that as soon as you naturalize to another citizenship of another country, you automatically lose Japanese citizenship. And this is where I discovered that this is kind of, that article is what sets the absolute kind of tone and fear of atmosphere around the issue of Japanese citizenship and dual citizenship in Japan. And so I wanted to, explore this by making a film. And ultimately, like, I would have this vision of a feature-length film where, like Hafu, I explore many different people's stories and even the history of why Japanese nationality law is the way it is. But I think with the longer the film, the more complicated, the bigger budget you need and all of that. So I wanted to start with a short film. And so I'm telling the story of a woman named Yuri Kondo who lost her Japanese citizenship when she naturalized to become a U.S. citizen. She had been living in the U.S. for 20 plus years at that point, was married to an American husband, had a daughter, was raising her child in Arizona. And she, at the time, was not aware that she would lose her Japanese citizenship upon naturalizing. And so she kind of, and in her surroundings, she saw many other Japanese people who had 2 passports that were coming and going from Japan without any issues. So she did the same. And it wasn't until maybe like 15 years later, something around that when she went to renew her Japanese passport, her at the passport, agency office, they basically said, we suspected you have naturalized to U.S. citizenship. We, more or less wouldn't renew her Japanese passport. And so she reluctantly left Japan on her U.S. passport and continued to go back and forth between Japan and the U.S. on her U.S. passport. And so where it gets really interesting in terms of her story is that right before COVID, she decided to come to Japan, where her daughter was living, to kind of, she had heard the rumors of what was going on, the pandemic was starting. And so she decided to go to Japan to be with her daughter's family and live with them, kind of shelter in place with them. But she entered on her US passport within that like 90-day visa waiver. And she still remains in Japan to this day. And so, the borders closed. And that was another thing, like with the citizenship issue, really, so many families were impacted. If people had different citizenship status in their families, it was very difficult to get into Japan at that time. And so I think for her, she felt she made the right decision. She wanted to be with her daughter and grandkids. But she, realized she was overstaying her visa on a U.S. passport. And so she did this incredible thing. She decided after the pandemic lesson, she decided to sue the government to challenge the Japanese nationality law. And so I started filming with her a little bit over a year ago, and have just picked up her story from, she basically went and sued her local government in Fukuoka where she was living, and her case was rejected, and so now they're appealing to the Supreme Court. And so that's the story that I'm following. And through that, I hope that I can address some of these different, questions that everybody's feeling about dual citizenship in Japan, and documenting her fight to change the law. Sorry, that was long.
That's an incredible story. No, I'm seriously, that was fantastic. I'm in. When is this playing? Is it, you're still working on it?
I need to edit. Yes, I need to edit. So it'll probably take a good 6 months or a year before we'll be ready to release it.
Okay, so we got time. So you'll let us know when you're ready to release. We'll just bring you back on the show.
Okay, that would be great.
Then we can talk more about it.
Yeah.
Do you think the law will be? Do you think anything will happen with the law by the time you release the film?
I think, like many of the other laws in Japan, such as the LGBTQ, marriage, and also the law of having the name being like when married couples get married, they have to have the same last name, and that's being challenged as well. These are big fights, and it's a big thing to change Japanese law. So is there a possibility? There is a possibility, I guess, always, but it's certainly a big fight. But I think that's part of telling the story, is to show that challenge and really the impact of how this law impacts this personal family, this individual family, but how that, the Japanese government estimates that over 1 million people have dual citizenship, Japanese and something else. And so that's a lot of people. And that's the people who are like me, who are born and like the government knows. But there are many people who have, also naturalized to other citizenships. So there are people who have many more multi-citizenships who are Japanese as well. And so I really want to show how restrictive the law is, and how it to me, it's really kind of, defines, it's such a clear cut of like, oh, you are Japanese, you're not Japanese. But this woman who lost her Japanese citizenship, she's a 7-year-old woman who I think, by anybody who would ever meet her would think, oh, she's Japanese. She doesn't stop being Japanese because she's not a Japanese citizen. So why is the government, especially when we are in this, we're all aware that Japan's population is declining, and population is aging. Why do we kick out our own Japanese citizens for simply trying to build bridges and build lives in other parts of the world, when so much they often are are Japanese teachers abroad and bring Japanese culture and share it with the communities? I don't understand it, and so I want to bring attention to that through this film.
I think it's something that in many ways is playing out in many different countries. Japan obviously has more of an isolationist sort of flavor to it compared to a lot of other countries, is the best way to put it. But and I get it, because obviously as the population's declining, sometimes you try to hold on to what you have to keep your traditions, especially a country like, these countries like Japan or China or South Korea, where there's just thousands of years of history. So it makes sense in that respect. But you're right, things are changing. You have to adapt or die, pretty much is what you have to do. But what I find is fascinating too about this lens is that maybe, as you know, like in America, we're having our own issues with immigration, even though most of these are self-inflicted. We're all trying to determine what the 21st century looks like in terms of our identity. Identity has been obviously a huge part of the social discourse over the last 10 years. And I think in many ways, it's like a perfection board. All those pieces are still up in the air. We're figuring out now where they're going to land. A documentary like this isn't just important to highlight the issues in Japan, but also is kind of a funhouse mirror to everybody else as well. Because I think those issues are being dealt with. They're different. Everyone's a little different, but yet at the same time, very similar, because it's about identity. It's about who we are as a nation, what we're going to be as a nation. And maybe we can all learn something from it, even if we're not Japanese.
Yeah, absolutely.
What other documentaries do you want to work on? What would, after all this, what would be
Oh
your
gosh.
dream documentary?
I'm making my dream documentary right now.
You
so-
are? That's it. Well, then that's it, right? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many stories that I would love to continue to tell, and so I hope I continue to have the opportunity to do that. Absolutely.
And I just wanted to mention also, could you maybe just tell us a little bit about your other documentary, Minidoka?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yes, because yes, I know that we are running beyond the
No,
1
we're gonna
hour
go late, guys.
mark,
Hope
but
everyone
yes,
grab
just
another cup of
because
coffee. We're doing this.
yes, because once again, it's about humans, and people and people's stories, those who were impacted by the Second World War, and they are all like us, everybody else as well. So
Yeah. So I came to after I made Hafu, I came back to the U.S. And it was interesting because I was trying to find my own place in the United States, because I had carved out something while I was in Japan. And there is a Japanese American community, but my family history is not. I came directly from Japan, and so I don't have this family history of the incarceration during World War II. But that was such a huge moment for this community, and when it's kind of you kind of can't like be part of the Japanese American community without learning about it and hearing these stories. And when I looked at and if you actually look into watching documentary films about the Japanese incarceration, there's actually quite a number of them. But I often found that, and rightfully so, I think it's the same with the hibakusha of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that there is a generation who directly experienced the atrocities of this war. And unfortunately, we're 80 years from the war. These folks are dying, and they're not able to tell these stories anymore. And so, I really believe that it's kind of now resting on the next generation to continue to tell these stories so that we don't forget and we don't repeat the mistakes of that past. And so through Minidoka, I told the story of a young half Japanese American activist named Joseph Lackman, Shoji Lackman, and he basically traced back his family history of incarceration at a camp in Idaho called Minidoka. And so I really wanted to tell, kind of this new generation story. And he was so gracious to let me allow to film him. We have, I think, a little bit of a clip of it. Should we play? Do we have time to play?
Yes.
We have time. There's no time clock.
My name is Sam Shoji. I'm 56 years old. I spent 13 months in Puyallup and Minidoka.
So much of our family's story is preserved in that testimony.
The feeling of being pointed out as an enemy during a crucial period of my life and without a chance to defend myself caused many psychological wounds from which I feel I have never recovered.
Uncle Sam says it was this tragedy of crushing the emotional spirit of individuals as a result of confining innocent people in concentration camps.
In sort of hushed tones, my uncles and aunts, they called it camp.
But she didn't really talk to you about it, right?
Well, one thing she did mention is that she didn't want us to be bitter. We just didn't get the details.
Never really had a time where it felt really appropriate to talk about it.
So I think it's your generation that are the ones that are going to carry this forward.
Wow. once again, these are lessons that I first heard about the incarceration of Japanese citizens when I was young from, of all people, George Carlin. He was the one who talks about it in a stand-up special when he kind of, he was always very cynical about the American government, and he would talk about how, well, you don't have rights, you just have temporary privileges. If you don't believe me, look up on the internet, because the internet was a new thing at the time, Japanese in incarceration camps. And especially in today's political climate, let's just not forget these stories. I found that a lot of people are trying to use that as an example of the paths that we don't want to go down again. Was that part of why you were motivated to do this?
Yeah, I actually made this film during the first Trump administration. And it was my reaction to it. I think early on during the Muslim ban, there was, I think different political pundits would say that, let's bring back the incarceration camps. And so I really, was alarmed by that. And then, had been, as I mentioned earlier, like aware of this Japanese American history and wanted the chance to kind of tell it through my filmmaking lens. And so, and ultimately the film was published by Time magazine. And so, it was able to be released on the anniversary of the executive order from FDR that sent all the Japanese Americans into the camps.
You don't take on light topics. I'm just going to say, but that's okay, because we need to hear about these things. I think it's important.
Yes.
So for everybody, please follow Megumi's work. Now, before we go and we sign off, we had a lot of people comment, so I feel like as if we should say something. Martha, I have to zoom. My eyes are so bad. I have to get closer to the camera. Martha Brady loves your work. Kevin Reynolds, a shout out. Tetsuki Ichichi-san, he was our third or fourth guest on our program, and he can't wait to see your next film. Kevin Reynolds followed up saying that his granddaughter is a quarter English, French, Japanese, and Chinese. And Keegan Kawahara, who I just recently connected with, he says that he remembers seeing the trailer and he never knew that you made it. And he says he is really close with the Oi family, so this was amazing to watch. Harry Wright's a big fan too. I think he wants to do business with you. You should follow up on the comments. He's ready to make a movie about Matthew Perry, so we should definitely check that out. And I think, and then Lillian Chen, who is Chinese, who lives in the States. I'll just read what she says because it's kind of a nice way to sort of get close to wrapping the show up. That international marriages can broaden one's international perspective. Through interacting with foreign partners, different cultural exchanges can broaden one's horizons and break free from the original framework, making the marriage vibrant and fostering a more comprehensive international perspective. Learning a new language can not only enhance language skills, but also deepen emotional connections between each other. Everyone in the world has something worth learning from others.
Beautiful.
And I think in many ways, we hope that our show does that too. We learn a little bit from Japan, and Japan learns a little bit from whatever the heck is happening here in America. Sometimes I get worried maybe we just needed to be a one-way street for a while because we need to get on our meds and settle down a little bit over here. But, there's always a happy medium. We see it every time we swing past. Megumi-san, thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to speak with you.
All right. So everybody who's following us, we're going to have links to all of her stuff. So keep track of, I'd say like she's bigger and brighter, that bigger and brighter things are happening, even though you've been doing this for 15 years.
Yeah.
Thank you all for watching. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Thank you. See you.